Andrew Campbell is an expert on family violence and the associated risks of harm for adults, children, and animals residing in homes where the violence occurs. Andrew recently obtained his master's in public health from Purdue University and has presented at over 100 conferences and trainings since 2019. He's authorized 12 academic publications over the last 2 years that include papers cited by the FBI, the CDC, and in over 700 international academic studies. Andrew's so busy, I'm quite sure that number has gone up since this was written. His book, Not Without My Pet, Understanding the Relationships between Animals, between Victims of Domestic Violence and Their Pets, was released in September 2021. In addition to being an author, researcher, and educator, Andrew also speaks as a survivor of family violence in childhood. And I'd like to give the floor, the screen to Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us from America today.
Thank you, Mark. I want to thank you, first of all, and all the other conference organizers, too, for this opportunity today. I truly am honored to be a part of this program, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to present today. I also want to thank all the translators who make it possible for so many to be able to hear these messages, these important messages today. And I also want to thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to speak with you today about a topic I feel a great deal of passion for, one that I think is just so extremely important. And that being, I mean, in a broader sense, I'll be talking about family violence. And when I say family violence, I'm talking abuse and harm that occurs within the walls of the home. And we know obviously that abuse and violence is harmful and hurtful wherever it happens, but something even more obviously harmful when it occurs in your home, you know, where the one place you should feel safe. So we're looking at things such as child abuse, partner abuse, pet abuse, when I'm thinking family violence. Today I'm going to put a special emphasis, as I often do, on the pet piece of all of that and how pets play into everything. Now, with only 30 minutes, I'm going to throw a lot at you in a short period of time. I'm also going to try not to speak too quickly because I know we've got a lot of translation going on. But I do plan to cover a lot. I'm going to look at a few different areas and angles of this topic, and then we're going to look at essentially, you know, what happens when we protect animals in this scenario, and what happens when we don't. And so, with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in to this presentation. I often ask why these topics, you know, why the focus on family violence and the emphasis on pets. And I'm an author and an educator. Excuse me. Excuse me, and a researcher in this area. You know, but more than any of that, I'm a survivor myself. You see a picture of me with Shelby there. At 14, I woke up, and this certainly wasn't the first event like this that happened, but rather a culmination. I woke up to my mom screaming, crying in my room. My dad forcefully stepped over her to leave the room, kind of made a big scene and left the house. I'm not sure when he was planning to come back. He had done that several times in the months that preceded that event. But I at 14, I helped my mom up to her feet, and I said, "Hey, if you won't let my dad back in this house, you, me, and my younger sister will make it. We'll figure it out. You know, I don't know what it looks like. I know it's not going to be easy, but we'll figure it out." You know, even at 14, I could see just how harmful partner abuse can be. Now, that was overwhelming. I often say, you know, even when the perpetrator of abuse leaves the home, it's not so much that the harm stops as that it changes. So it's you know, even that day after my dad left and my mom trusted me and the three of us got through the next several years, it certainly wasn't easy. The only reason I'm here today is because of the dog you see in that picture there, Shelby. You know, I for a long time, the next probably 10 years or more, I feared every night my dad would return to kill my mom. So even in youth, I would sit on the back porch there and clear eyesight of my mom's back window. Because I figured that's where he'd come. I didn't think he'd come through the front door. I thought he'd come through her window there in the back. And I would sit out there every night till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, just waiting. I was afraid that if I went to sleep and that it would happen. And all of those nights, Shelby sat right there with me. Some nights he would lick the tears from my eyes while I cried because it was quite overwhelming. And other nights he would actually kind of stand on the edge of the yard and kind of look back and say, you know, I've got this. You know, Shelby never spoke a word, but he always said everything I needed to hear when I needed to hear it most. I'll talk a little bit more about him as we go on, but certainly I would not be here if it weren't for that dog, and that's where a lot of my passion for this topic comes from. Probably, and I shouldn't say probably, it is the proudest accomplishment that I think I will ever, or that I will ever do, is breaking the familiar cycle of abuse in my own home, and with my wife creating a safe environment for our kids. But again, I'll finish up with that thought and describing why Shelby was so critical for me to be able to break that cycle and not continue that cycle of harm and abuse, but rather create a safe environment for my own children. You see my son Will there for his 5th birthday this year. Not a bad birthday gift. We went and saw Paul McCartney, and that was Will's first concert. It's going to be tough to top that. I don't know what we'll do for a second concert. It probably will go downhill from there, but just a tremendous and wonderful experience with my son there. I firmly believe this. When we're thinking family violence, when we're talking about abuse, harm in the home, you can't best help any you see pictured here unless you help all pictured here. And by that I mean adult victims, child victims, and pets, animal victims in these homes. I truly believe it. You have to view them as a team. We can work to help one, and that's good. But again, if we're not helping all three, eventually, again, I think it kind of counteracts, or will counteract our work eventually. We have to include all three in our planning and in our initiatives if we want to best help any here. You can help the adults, again, but if the children and pets are still suffering, that adult still suffers right there. If you can, protect a child, but forget to include or neglect to include their pets, that pet is a critical part of them. And if you don't include that, you're again, forgetting part of that child as well. So again, you have to protect all if you want to best protect any. As I said, I'm going to kind of go through a lot of different angles of this topic and stay within our time frame here. But I'm going to start by talking or sharing some specific examples when pets are targeted in incidents of family violence. This is quotes from victims. It wasn't until I told him I was leaving that he began to target my children and cats. Unfortunately, this is something I see often. Perps sometimes describe targeting animals in these homes as a way of quote-unquote changing up the violence. This may be, when they sense that the victim or the adult victim is about to report the abuse, is about to end the relationship. I hear perps just describe this idea of I needed to do something different. Again, they're looking to inflict as much harm and gain control and power in the household. And often they decide the best way to do that is to target, again, those often most vulnerable in these homes, being children and pets. He said if I left, it would be a death sentence for my beagle. My kids love that dog so much, and I knew he would kill it if I left. So I stayed for 5 more years. Heartbreaking reality. In many communities here in the U.S. and around the world, we don't include pets in family violence planning. And again, if we fail to include pets, we often will exclude families that will not come without their pet. And this is a good example of that. Again, in this community where this quote came from, there was no allowance for pets in the domestic violence shelter. The adult victim knew that if she left that pet behind, that he would be killed. The threat you see listed there, it's rarely an idle one. When perpetrators say that they're going to harm pets in the home, they almost always carry it out. Victims know that. They know that threat carries weight, and it can be very effective, again, in delaying their response and their opportunity to seek safety and help and assistance for the entire family unit. The cats are completely different now that we have them. I remember how skittish they were in her home. It's as if they were absorbing the fear and stress my daughter was experiencing. These are the heartbreaking words of a father who lost 2 daughters in a double homicide. One of the daughters had just ended a relationship, and her ex-boyfriend knew that the sister had helped give her the confidence and courage to do that. So he laid in wait and ambushed and killed both of them. The father, though, and I was part of a domestic violence homicide review team for a couple of years there, and that's where I came in contact with this story. And I'll never forget what the father describing the cats in that home. He said, we'd go and we'd visit my daughter, and the cats would just act odd. He said they'd kind of be off in the corner. They'd be kind of just acting very odd for cats. And we used to make fun of them and joke, like, these are the strangest cats we've ever been around. And he said, but now that my wife and I have adopted these cats after we lost my daughters, I'm realizing, they're acting normal. They're acting like you would expect a cat to act. And I'm starting to understand and better realize that the cats weren't acting weird so much as they were trying to tell me something. They were absorbing that fear, that anxiety, that stress, the trauma that my daughter was experiencing when we weren't there, and they were exhibiting it behaviorally. And we can often see animals do that, right? Absorb fear, stress, and anxiety, that is being experienced by the humans they are so tightly connected to. When we think about why pets are targeted in these homes, I think I already talked about the fact that pets are often very vulnerable in communities. But I also think we need to think about what they provide, and that helps us better understand why they're often targeted, unfortunately. Think about pets you have now, pets or animals, non-human animals that you've had relationships with in the past. Think about some of the characteristics and things they've provided for you. And all of these things, obviously, are such critical components for emotional health and well-being. And that's just for on the normal day-to-day. For anybody, these types of things are important. But how much more so for people who are experiencing trauma, residing in a disaster-torn area or living in an abusive home? These pets are often life-saving. I go down this list and I think of my own dog, Shelby, and everything on that list he provided. The other reality is particularly for children in abusive home environments, pets may be their best and only chance at some of these things. Now, that's not a knock at the adult victim in the home, not saying that the adult victim doesn't want to provide these things for the children as well. But the reality is in many of these homes, adult victims have so much taken from them, they have little to give. And it's not so much that they don't want to be there for their children. When you're a victim of abuse ongoing, it takes its toll, and it means that there's little left to give to children and others around you. And it's just another unfairness of abuse victimization, in that it limits your ability to be there for those you want to be there for. So we often see pets filling that role. So again, I think this is why they're often targeted. Perpetrators see that these pets are working in the opposite direction of what they're wanting to accomplish. The perpetrator wants to create an environment of fear. They want to create this idea that the human victims in the home are alone, they're isolated. Pets are working in the opposite way, and I think that's why they often can become targets of these perpetrators. I think it's important to note too that when we're thinking about animals and the role that they can play for these victims and in providing support for humans, is that we're not just talking cats and dogs, but animals in all forms and types. You see some picture here, and I think particularly in more rural environments, we see livestock and other types of farm type animals that again can provide this role. I'm reminded of a now man, but he was describing his childhood, and he said, as a boy, our cow on our farm was my source of support. As soon as I got off that school bus, I was running to our cow just to tell it everything. That cow was what got me through, talking to it. And obviously it didn't answer, but it listened. And so again, I think it's so important to note that when we're talking about this, we're not just talking dogs and cats and what you think of traditionally as pets, but really any animals. Again, if it's more about what the animal is providing for the humans in the home, that being support and encouragement, that makes them a target. Obviously, no animal would be safe when a perpetrator resides in these homes. I'm going to share quickly some findings from this particular study that kind of builds off what we talked about and looks at this idea of a domestic violence perpetrator, partner abuse perpetrator, who also harms pets in the home. So again, we talked about why these pets may be targeted. We shared some examples, but looking at it from a data perspective, what does that mean? When the domestic violence perp also targets pets, what does it look like in the home? Is it more dangerous in the home? Is there greater risk in the home? That's what I looked at in this study that you see here that was just actually republished in the journal last year. And I'm going to share just a few findings from this study. What I did for the paper is I looked at different characteristics of partner abuse and then explored by stratifying it by if the perpetrator has a history of animal cruelty in the home or no known history. So when we look at things such as rape or a history of forced sex, just in general, 8% of partner abuse victims in my study, and I'll add the data collected from my study came from police officers here in Indiana in the USA. Police officers responding to domestic violence collected this data. I analyzed nearly 10,000 police reports for this study. So a lot of reports and incidents involved, and here's how things broke down. 8% just in general. But again, just knowing one thing, that perp also has a history of harming animals, more than tripled the rate of rape in these homes. Strangulation, again, something we're very concerned about. We know high risk of fatal outcomes when strangulation is involved. We also know it's a key marker or predictor of a future homicide in the home. Very concerned by strangulation. 47% in general. Again, just know one thing, know that perp harms pets too, and we're up closer to 80%. And then finally for today, in this study, I looked at a lot of other things as well, but for sake of time, I kept it just to these 3 variables. Looking at victims living with daily fear they will be killed. And this is important. When we think about post-traumatic stress disorder, we know the most severe symptomology is associated with the chronicity or how long one fears for one's life. So again, fearing for it every day. And again, it can look a little different, right? In my case, I feared for my mom's life every day. But again, when we think about that stress and anxiety, the impact and the effects are often the same on the human body, on the brain, and other key systems. 35% in general. Again, just knowing that one piece, right? That the perp also harms pets in the home quickly elevates it to 80%. There was no variable, at least in my study, that I could find that seemed to increase risk across the board in these homes than knowing that this partner abuse perpetrator also harms pets. So again, we know that these pets can provide life-saving support when they're kept safe. Conversely, though, when they're targeted, we know that's bad. We know things are about to get really bad in that home. And again, it's something we have to pay attention and note. I'll also add, for sake of time, I didn't include a slide regarding it, but that risk that's increased when pets are harmed in these homes is not just for the family, but for responding officers as well. I published a paper, I believe it was last year, that explored that topic and also noted that not only when we find out that pet abuse is occurring in the context of domestic violence, not only does that mean bad things for the family, it means that anyone who responds to an incident in that house, meaning often an officer, would be at elevated risk as well. As I said, conversely, when pets are protected and they're kept safe, you see the life-saving support that Shelby gave to me. As I would get older, I would contemplate suicide. You know, I was just being crushed by the amount of stress every night, literally every night, sitting out there waiting. And just you know, I worked multiple jobs. I had to quit sports. My whole life became consumed, you know, in keeping my family safe. And the stress was considerable. And as I said many times, I was very close to ending my life. I tell you, if it weren't for that dog that you see there, I would not be here. I would not. I don't think I would even be alive, but I certainly wouldn't be here doing this work. I can't put into words what Shelby did for me. Again, it speaks to the importance, you know, and when we can keep these relationships safe, again, they are life-lengthening, life-altering, life-changing, life-saving for these kids. I really believe that we often find that to be the case in these homes, that the well-being of the children and pets is truly intertwined. Again, they're often the most vulnerable beings in the home. So as I said, if we know pets are being targeted in the home, those children, if they're not already being targeted, they will be. And at the very least, they're going to be significantly impacted by the harm to those pets. We have to view them as intertwined and interconnected. Now, this is my most recent study, which I published earlier this year. I looked at animal control reports. So I often use animal control reports or police reports as my data source in most of my studies. But for this study, I looked at any time children were involved in animal control reports. So I looked at if children perpetrated acts of animal cruelty, if they witnessed it, and if they were involved in a cross-services report, meaning child welfare was investigating the welfare of children in the home and noted concerns regarding animals. And so we saw kind of a cross-reporting there. What was interesting to note is no matter how children were involved in these types of incidents, they seem to be at great risk in every case. And particularly when there was a cross-services report, the child almost always shared the same outcome as the animal in the home. So if animal control was responding for concerns of neglect, it was noted that children were also being neglected in the home. Animal control responding to a stray animal, and guess what? It was often a child wandering with that animal who was also lost. Animal control report for animal cruelty, concerns in child welfare for child abuse as well. It really drove home the point to me that, again, the well-being is often intertwined. You can't help either without helping both, and I think it's so important that we consider that. Again, thinking about what pets provide, they are often critical to these children, especially from an emotional support standpoint, anytime disaster, trauma, anything is occurring, children often rely heavily on these animals. Sadly, as I said, if that relationship is not protected, if we see these animals being abused, we can see children actually go on to become the abuser. And unfortunately, we know that's often the case. There's many reasons why children themselves will engage in acts of animal cruelty. But one reason is watching a perpetrator do it in the home who seems to get what they want, right? So if the perpetrator of domestic violence begins to target pets and it results in the adult victim deciding not to report it, to delay a report, the child sees the perpetrator seemingly get what they want in the action, and maybe the child begins to commit acts of animal cruelty as well. Maybe they just see it and it becomes normalized to them, right? Children are very dependent on their caregivers to help them establish what normal looks like, what's healthy, what's normal. They see adults that are trusted or should be trusted doing these things, they begin to do it as well. Whatever the reason is, when children are engaging in these acts, we have to pay attention. We have to consider, again, with the idea of a shared well-being often the case, if children are committing acts of animal cruelty, is this child a victim of abuse themselves, now or in the past? If we don't effectively intervene, these children are at very high risk to go on to commit further acts of violence in the home, in the community, and in the classroom. And unfortunately, we see many examples of this, even just looking at here in the U.S., school shooters and mass shooters. Even the most conservative estimates say that at least 54% of school shooters in the U.S. have a known history of animal cruelty that preceded the act. We also see even in recent events, some of this same type of history. Again, often this idea. It doesn't mean that every child who commits animal cruelty will go on to become a mass murderer or engage in a school shooting incident. But again, we have to pay attention to it because we know many who commit these acts do have this history. And again, it just speaks to the importance of taking it seriously and working to effectively intervene. I'm going to wrap up here in our next 6 minutes or so. Maybe it might be 8 minutes. I'll try to keep my talk right at 30 minutes. I just spoke on this topic in Texas for 6.5 hours, so it was tricky to condense, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but we'll finish strong here in the last 8 minutes. I wanted to look at next, what does it look like? How does disaster impact and affect this? And again, as another paper that I just published last year, I talked about this, and what I noted in the paper is disaster always furthers disparity. So any areas that we're failing at or that we're behind in or that are underappreciated, don't get enough attention. When resources get even less, obviously attention gets even less. So unfortunately, we see cracks that we talk about children often falling through the cracks. These cracks only widen and become huge and large gaps, and we just see more and more falling through. When we look at disaster in particular, and again for this paper I looked at natural disasters, regardless of the type of disaster, we always see a dramatic increase in family violence, sometimes again as much as 600%. And I think it's important to note, if you look on the disasters on the left there, it really, again, doesn't matter the type of disaster. So it's not so much that an earthquake causes an increase in domestic violence, but rather the conditions created by disaster, right? And I think in many ways they mirror other types of events, such as war and other things such as that, where we see this upheaval of society. We see obviously fear for one's life and safety, increased stress, limited resources, things such as that, always tends to increase, or we see an increase in family violence. How does that impact pets? Well, again, they become even more important to the humans that are so tightly connected to them. I described again, all the critical things and characteristics pets provide. Again, even more so in times of trauma and stress for these families and these humans. We can think of many examples of disasters and pets, and even from the earliest recorded disasters. Here's an image of the mummified remains of a child clutching a dog. This is from Mount Vesuvius eruption in Pompeii and the surrounding areas. So even from the earliest recorded disasters, we see evidence of humans clinging tightly to their pets during a time of disaster, and we see that pictured there. We know when we can protect pets in disaster and allow them to stay with their humans, that good things happen. It can become a protective factor where humans are more likely to seek safety from a disaster if they can bring their pet too. Otherwise, they're going to stay right there and stay in the danger. Again, if we don't account for pets, we're not going to protect the people connected to them either. When they are separated from pets at a time of disaster, everything I've talked about is only worse. We think about the normal things that children experience in disaster, which is declining mental health. We think of stress. We think of anxiety. Studies indicate that that is only compounded if the companion animal that they so deeply are connected and tied to is separated from them at that time when they need the most. It just intensifies the negative impact. So again, life-saving when we can keep the pairs together, really life-altering and sometimes life-ending, life-shortening if separated. I certainly found that to be the case for me. Kind of a hard photo to look at, but that's a picture of me right before I lost Shelby. I had never planned on what I was going to do after him. I didn't think I was going to be alive for it. I had planned to kill myself. I was so dependent on that dog for my daily, just getting by every day, that I had no plans of a future without him. And I can see that. I see it in my eyes in that photo, and I remember what I was thinking. And I was going to end my life. And it really speaks to, again, when things get bad, these kids are going to cling even more tightly to these pets, and it's so critical that we find ways to keep them together, because again, it can be an important continuity and support and in comfort at a time when they need it the most. Again, like I said, we protect it. Good things happen. So here you can even see in cancer wards of hospital, in hospitals and areas where children, again, are suffering life-ending or shortening illness and very serious illness. Just bringing in an animal, a dog maybe that's not even known to them, can provide such comfort. I used to work at a children's hospital, and you could just see the impact of these pets just walking through the halls, not just on the children, but on the hospital staff as well. I've talked about school shootings today. We also see dogs brought in as therapy dogs after a school shooting in the U.S., and many of these dogs in some of these school shootings have just stuck around and become fixtures at that school because of the continual support and comfort that they provide. Not just saying that it looks like pets can help in these scenarios, but there's actually good science to confirm that. This study looked at the harmful effects of cortisol, which is one of the hormones our body releases when we experience stress. So when we experience stress, our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure increases. Cortisol is dispersed through our body to bring us back down, to bring us back to normal. When it's pumping through our blood and body too much, which is often the case in abusive or trauma-impacted disaster areas, it can cause great harm to our bodies. But studies show that just the presence of a pet dog can mitigate that harmful effect. Studies have found that pet dogs can be actually a better buffer against the harmful effects of stress for children than their parents. For women, it can be a better buffer than their best friend. And for married partners, it can be a better buffer than one's partner. So again, studies continue to show that dogs are awesome, as are all animals in all forms and sizes. I'm going to wrap up here to keep us right on time. But again, as I said, I've shared kind of a chronological sequence of photos of me and Shelby. One of the biggest things that I always feared, and as I said, I didn't plan to even live really into adulthood. Never figured I would have a family. But once I got a little older and started thinking about it, I really was scared to have children. I thought, there's no way I can be a good dad because I didn't have one. I don't have a blueprint for what that's supposed to look like. How could I be a good dad? But then I began to realize that I actually did have a blueprint. I thought back to my relationship with Shelby. And again, it's so important for kids, for adults alike. When you're in a difficult, trauma-impacted, trauma-infused environment, dogs, pets can be that one bright spot, that one reason to keep going, that one reason not to end it all, that one reason to get up tomorrow morning, and that one reason to try to better yourself, to think that there's something better out there. It kind of makes sense. If humans are harmed by other humans, they're going to struggle to trust other humans. And I think that's why they, particularly children, often cling to these pets, and they're so critical in terms of the emotional support they provide. I know it was this relationship here that made my own relationship now with my kids possible. I would do anything just to go back and just have one more chance to say thank you to Shelby. I remember that our last walk together, that was my escape. Shelby and I would go for long walks in the fields around my house, and that was when I felt normal. But I remember the last day, Shelby's legs gave out from old age, and I often say, I picked him up and I carried him home that day just as he had carried me for so long. I know he got me through the bad, and he has he has a paw, or probably even four, in the good I have today, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Mark mentioned the book I wrote. If you have interest, that's available on Amazon, also on my and other websites as an ebook or a paperback. Also, you'll note my contact info here. If you look at the bottom there, the Campbell Research and Consulting, if you just go to www.campbellresearchandconsulting.com, you'll find all of my studies I make free there. So anything I shared that was one of my studies, you can download any of those. I make sure that they're all available for free. And so you can find any of that info there. Other ways to contact and connect with me as well. But thank you again, once again, for this opportunity and for giving me the chance to share this message today.